So, guys, The Legend of Zelda is one of Nintendo's biggest franchise, and arguably, it is one of their holy trinity, obviously alongside Pokemon and Mario. However, there is one game in the Legend of Zelda series which seems to be universally agreed to be like the worst game in the series, and genuinely, it's kind of surprising when you look at which game it is. So, the game in question is Zelda II: The Adventures of Link. Now, why is this the most hated Zelda game, right? I know we've had quite a few different Zelda games over the years, and obviously some of them are like Link's crossbow training, where it's all right for what it is, but it's nothing major. But why is Zelda 2 like the most hated Zelda game? Now, I'm going to tell you why in this video, and it's based on what I've found from looking online and stuff. So take this with a pinch of salt, because obviously this is just based on what I've found online and fans talking on platforms like Reddit and Quora and all that sort of stuff. So, according to what I've found, Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, is so hated because of the fact there's no clear progression cues, a combat system which is one of the worst in the history of the Zelda franchise, and strange resource management, which makes it harder to progress through the vast overworld, and the dungeons also not being the best, because obviously when you die in the dungeons, you respawn at the entrance of the dungeon, you lose all your stuff basically, and it just makes things very awkward. Now, the combat system, from what I understand, is not the best with Zelda 2. Like, the combat system is not really that great. We also know that with the progression system, essentially from what I've heard and what I've seen, you can progress through the Zelda 2 game, get stuck, and not know where you're supposed to go, because there's no clear idea given to you within the game where you're supposed to go. And this is obviously doesn't really help when you're trying to obviously progress through the levels and stuff. And another thing that I did remember seeing some people bring up, which I think is quite interesting, is actually the fact that it is a more of a side-scrolling game. Right, most of Zelda 2, from what I understand, is played via side-scrolling sort of aspect, similar to Super Mario Bros. And obviously, many people who obviously enjoy games on the Super Nintendo and later systems like A Link to the Past see Zelda 2 as very primitive in its design compared to obviously other Zelda games that were produced later on. Now, I do understand that these criticisms, I do think that they're also quite valid as well. But I also think, the difficulty of this game doesn't help. This game seems to be wildly difficult, and I reckon it's largely because Nintendo wanted to sell people this game, but didn't want them, trading it in, or didn't want them to rent it from Blockbuster, or because you could rent video games back in the day. And they essentially wanted these gamers to buy the game, beat the game, and then obviously keep the game and obviously try and buy other Nintendo games, because obviously Nintendo would make money that way. That's just from what I've read online, there seems to be general consensus that the game is too difficult, and the game just isn't as good as the first one. Which I understand, and I've been critical of the first game as well. But yeah, this is just my opinion based on what I've seen. This is just how it seems to be. But Zelda 2, it's not bad. From what I understand, it's not a bad game. I think by today's standards, a lot of people consider it bad due to how it's coded, and obviously it being massively difficult for many newer gamers to pick up and play. But I do think, if you were a fan of these games back in the day, you would have probably enjoyed it. And I also think that you probably need the manual to actually understand what you're doing in this game. That's probably a mandatory thing, is that you have to watch a few playthroughs in order to understand what you're doing to progress Zelda 2. But overall, I do think it's a little bit overheated, because obviously a lot of NES games, aren't the best. Genuinely, the Ninja Turtles games, for example, on NES aren't the best either. So there is that as well. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, like, share, comment, turn on notifications. I've been EC, and I'm signing out. Peace.